"Let's go, baby. We can't pay for that." Sarah's whisper cracked as she tugged her daughter's sleeve, but little Emma's eyes stayed fixed on the steaming plate of biscuits and gravy sitting untouched at the stranger's table, and the shame of it burned hotter in Sarah's chest than the cold wind that had followed them into that Cheyenne diner. She hadn't eaten proper in 3 days. She'd told Emma the same lie twice now, that she wasn't hungry, that grown women didn't need as much food as growing girls. And Emma believed it because 6-year-olds believe what their mamas tell them, even when their mamas are lying through their teeth to keep them from crying at night. Sarah had 11 cents in her coat pocket, and a dead husband's debt trailing her out of Missouri like a shadow that wouldn't let go. Thomas had been gone 8 months. A fever took him in the spring, and by summer the bank had taken the farm, and by the time the leaves turned, she was walking west with a child on her hip and a bag on her back, chasing a promise of work that had dried up before she ever reached it. The diner smelled of coffee and bacon grease and wood smoke from the stove in the corner, and Emma's small hand had gone still in hers, not pulling away, just frozen, staring at that plate like it was the only thing left in the world. The man sitting at the table set his fork down slow. He was broad-shouldered, sunburned along the neck the way ranchmen get, with a hat pushed back off his forehead and eyes the color of creek water in October. He looked at the girl looking at his food, and something in his face shifted. "You two eatin' today?" he asked, and his voice was rough but not unkind. Sarah's spine went stiff. "We're just passing through, sir. Come on, Emma." "Ma'am, I asked you a question." "And it's none of your concern," Sarah said, though her voice shook on the last word, and she hated that it did. Hated that pride was the only thing she had left, and even that was fraying at the edges like an old coat sleeve. The diner had gone quiet around them. A few ranch hands at the counter turned to watch, and the woman behind the counter, an older lady with flour on her apron, was watching too. Not unkindly, but watching all the same, and Sarah felt the heat crawl up her neck. The man stood. He was taller than she'd guessed, and for one terrible second she thought he meant to throw them out himself, save the owner the trouble. Instead, he pulled out the chair across from him. "Sit," he said. "Both of you. Order whatever you like, I insist. We don't take charity." "It ain't charity. Call it a business proposition. I'll explain it once your girl's got some food in her belly, because I can't rightly talk business with a child looking like that at my biscuits." There was a small, crooked smile at the corner of his mouth, and it wasn't pity in his eyes, which was the only reason Sarah let herself lower into that chair, because she'd rather starve than be pitied. But a business proposition was a different thing entirely. That was survival. That she could stomach. His name was Caleb Whitfield, and he ran cattle on a spread 20 miles north called 3 Creek, inherited from his father, who died the winter before last, leaving Caleb alone with 400 head of cattle, 6 hired men, and a house with too many empty rooms. He explained it plain, no dressing it up. He needed a housekeeper. His last one had married off in the spring and moved to Laramie, and the men were eating burned beans and sleeping in dirty sheets. And he didn't have time to run a house and a ranch both. "Room and board," he said, "and $2 a week. There's a small cabin out back the girl could have to herself, or she could stay in the main house if you'd rather keep her close." "I don't reckon that's charity, ma'am. I reckon that's a fair trade for hard work, and I got plenty of that needs doing." Sarah studied him across the table, while Emma tore into her biscuits like she hadn't eaten in a week, which she hadn't. Not really. Not enough. She studied the calluses on his hands, the honest wear in his boots, the way he didn't look at her like she was something broken that needed fixing, or something to be feared, just a woman who needed work and had a child to feed. She'd learned to read men quick since Thomas died, learned which ones smiled with their eyes and which ones smiled with their teeth, and Caleb Whitfield's smile, when it came, reached all the way up. "Why us?" she asked. "You don't know me from Eve." "I know a woman who'd rather starve than beg," he said. "That tells me plenty." And I know a mother who'd rather lie to her own child than let that child see her scared. That tells me the rest." Sarah's throat tightened, and she looked down at her hands, chapped and raw from 3 days of walking in November wind. "You saw all that from a plate of biscuits?" "I saw all that from the way you tugged her sleeve like you were the one drowning and she was the rope." She took the job. What else was there to do? Pride was a fine thing to have when you weren't watching your daughter's ribs show through her nightgown, but pride didn't fill a belly, and Sarah had made her peace with that lesson somewhere around Nebraska. Three Creek Ranch sat in a valley with a creek running silver through the middle of it, and the house was bigger than any Sarah had lived in since she was a girl herself, before her own father drank away the family's good name. It was a lonely house, though. She felt that the moment she stepped inside, felt it in the dust on the mantel and the cold hearths in rooms nobody used. Felt it in the way Caleb ate his supper standing at the counter most nights, instead of sitting at the long table built for a family that never came. He didn't talk much about his father, and he never once mentioned a wife, though Sarah noticed a woman's shawl folded neat in a cedar chest upstairs, and she never asked about it, and he never explained it, and that silence sat between them like a locked door neither one wanted to knock on. Emma took to the ranch faster than Sarah did. Within a week, she'd named 3 of the barn cats and was following the ranch hands around asking 100 questions a day. And within a month, she was riding in front of Caleb on his horse of an evening, out to check the far fence line, her small hands gripping the saddle horn, and her laughter carrying back across the fields in a way that made something in Sarah's chest ache with a gladness she'd nearly forgotten how to feel. "She's got good hands with animals," Caleb told her one evening, the two of them sitting on the porch steps after Emma had gone to bed, the sky gone the color of a bruise fading to violet. "Reckon she'll make a fine rancher's wife someday if she takes after her mother's stubbornness and her father's kindness." "You never met her father." "I met her mother. Figure the girl got the kindness from somewhere, and it wasn't hardship that taught it to her." Sarah didn't answer that. She'd learned, in the weeks she'd worked his kitchen and scrubbed his floors and mended his shirts, that Caleb Whitfield had a way of saying true things sideways, like he was afraid to say them straight on, and she understood that fear because she carried a version of it herself. There was a careful distance they kept, the two of them, built brick by brick out of politeness and old wounds, and neither one of them reached across it, not for months, not even when the reaching would have been easy. Winter came hard that year. A blizzard blew through in January that buried the fence lines and killed 11 head of cattle before the men could get them into the low pasture shelter, and Caleb rode out in it anyway, against every warning his foreman gave him, because he said he wasn't going to sit warm by a fire while his herd froze to death in a ditch. He came back after midnight, half frozen himself, his lips blue and his hands so numb he couldn't work the buttons on his coat, and Sarah didn't think, she just acted, pulling him toward the hearth and working the buttons herself, her fingers clumsy with fear. "You fool man," she said, her voice breaking in a way she hadn't let it break in front of him before. "You'd have died out there for cattle." "Wasn't going to die," he said through chattering teeth, though his eyes were half closed and his color was wrong, gray under the sunburn. "You don't know that? You don't know that, Caleb?" And she was crying now, angry tears, the kind that come from fear more than sorrow, and he looked at her with something startled in his face, like he hadn't expected her to care that much, like he'd forgotten what it felt like for someone to be afraid of losing him. Sarah. Just her name, quiet, and it was the first time he'd said it without the ma'am folded in front of it. "Don't," she said. "Don't you dare die on me. Emma's already lost one father. I won't watch her lose." She stopped herself too late, the words already out, already hanging in the warm dark of the room between them. And she saw the understanding land in his face, saw him hear what she hadn't meant to say, that somewhere in these months of biscuits and mended shirts and evening rides across the fields, he had become something to Emma and something to her that neither of them had a name for yet, but both of them recognized. He didn't say anything. He was too cold, too tired. and the moment passed with him leaning into the fire and her wrapping a blanket tight around his shoulders. But something had cracked open that night that didn't close back up. Spring came slow that year, the way it does after a hard winter. Mud everywhere and the creek running high and loud with melt. It was in April that the trouble came, riding in on a black horse with a lawyer's satchel and a smile that didn't belong on an honest face. His name was Everett Klein, and he claimed a piece of paper that said half of Three Creek belonged to him, a debt Caleb's father had owed him years back, unpaid at the time of his death, and now called due with interest that had swollen it into a sum that would take the whole ranch to satisfy. "Your father was a gambling man in his younger years, Mr. Whitfield," Klein said, standing in the yard with his boots too clean for a working ranch. "And gambling men leave debts. I've been patient. I won't be patient forever." "That paper's a forgery," Caleb said, his jaw tight, his hands in fists at his sides. "My father never borrowed a dime from a man like you." "Prove it in court, then. I'll give you 30 days to find the money or the proof, whichever comes first." Sarah watched from the porch, Emma's hand tight in hers, and she saw something in Caleb's face she hadn't seen before, not even in the blizzard. Fear, real fear, the kind that comes from watching everything your father built, everything you've poured your own life into since his death, teeter on the edge of a stranger's greed. That night he didn't come in for supper. She found him in the barn, sitting on an overturned bucket with a lantern burning low, staring at nothing. "You should eat something," she said. "Can't stomach it." She sat down across from him on a bale of hay, close enough that the lantern light caught both their faces. "Tell me about your father." He was quiet a long while. He wasn't a gambling man. He was a careful man, almost to a fault, counted every penny. "That's why this doesn't sit right, Sarah. He wouldn't have borrowed from a snake like Klein, and if he had, he'd have told me. He told me everything, near the end. He knew he was dying and he wanted me to know how to run this place clean." His voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, just enough. "I already lost him once. I can't lose what he left me too. It's the only thing of him I've got left." "You won't lose it." "You don't know that." "No," she said, echoing his own words back to him from the winter, softer this time. "But I know you're not alone in it, not anymore." And she reached across the small space between the hay bale and the bucket and took his hand, and he let her, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, just sat in the lantern light with their fingers laced together like two people who'd finally stopped pretending they could carry their burdens separate. "Sarah," he said finally, "I need to tell you something, and I should have told you months ago." "Then tell me now." "That shawl in the cedar chest upstairs, it was my mother's. She died when I was young. I don't hardly remember her. And after she passed, my father never looked at another woman. Not once, not for 20 years, because he said he'd rather be alone with a good memory than settle for less than what he'd had. I always thought that was foolish, wasting a whole life on grief. But I understood it different after he died. I understood a man can be surrounded by hired hands and cattle and still be the loneliest soul in the county." He turned his hand over in hers, studying their fingers together in the lamplight. "I wasn't looking for a housekeeper that day in the diner, Sarah. I've had 3 housekeepers apply since Nancy left, and I turned every one of them down without even reading their letters. I don't know what made me stand up when I saw your girl looking at my plate, but I haven't been lonely once since you came to this ranch, not one single day. And I don't want to go back to being lonely again. Not ever." Sarah felt the tears come before she could stop them, and this time she didn't try to hide them from him. "I was so ashamed that day," she whispered, "standing in that diner with 11 cents in my pocket, watching my baby look at food she couldn't have. I've never felt smaller in my whole life." "You've never once looked small to me. Not that day, and not one day since." He lifted her hand and pressed it, rough knuckles and all, against his chest, right over his heart, and she could feel it beating hard and fast beneath her palm. "I don't have much certainty to offer you right now, not with Klein circling like a buzzard. But I know this much is true. Whatever happens with this ranch, I want you and Emma standing beside me when it happens, not as my housekeeper. As my wife, if you'll have me." The 30 days came and went in a blur of letters to the county courthouse, and a lawyer Caleb hired out of Cheyenne, a sharp young man named Foster, who dug through old records until he found what they needed, a bank ledger in his father's own careful hand, showing every debt the man had ever carried and paid, with no trace of Everett Klein's name anywhere in 20 years of entries. Klein's forged note fell apart in front of the county judge like wet paper, and he was run out of the territory inside a week, his black horse kicking up dust down the same road he'd ridden in on, and good riddance to him. They married in June, in the yard at 3 Creek, under a sky so blue it looked painted. With wildflowers Emma had picked herself woven into Sarah's hair instead of any store-bought veil, because Sarah said she didn't need finery. She'd had finery once and lost it. And what she wanted now was something that grew wild and came back every year no matter how hard the winter had been. Caleb wore his father's good coat, aired out and pressed, and when he said his vows, his voice didn't shake at all. Steady as a man who finally knew exactly where he belonged. Emma stood between them, holding a small basket of petals she forgot to throw because she was too busy grinning. And afterward, at the supper laid out on long tables in the yard, she climbed up into Caleb's lap without asking anyone's permission and declared to the whole gathered county that he was her papa now, and everyone had better get used to calling him that, which drew a great roar of laughter from the ranch hands and brought tears to more than one eye, including Sarah's. Years later, Emma would tell the story to her own children a different way each time, embellishing the blizzard, exaggerating the villain, but she always got one detail exactly right. Every single time. She always said that the day her mama had no money for supper, she'd been so hungry she couldn't stop staring at a stranger's plate of biscuits, and that stranger had looked at her not like a burden, but like something worth feeding. And Sarah, listening from her rocking chair by the fire, an old woman by then with Caleb's hand resting warm over hers, always smiled the same smile at that part of the story, because she remembered it clearer than any other day of her life. Not the shame of it, not the 11 cents in her pocket, just the way a stranger had pulled out a chair and asked them to sit, and how that one small kindness had built, biscuit by biscuit, into a home that never once let either of them go hungry again.